what time it is. Maybe I'm ready. You ready to bake? I'm ready to bake. Come on, let's go. I've miched you. Have you miched me? Hey friends, it's Martin and Tucker. We're in the studio today and we're making a miche. Miche is a classic French bread. It's a combination of whole wheat, whole rye, and white flour. We use a sourdough preferment, so it's got tons of flavor. It's a big loaf, it's over 1 kilo. But the beauty of that is that you can eat it the entire week. You can have toast with breakfast. You can make sandwiches. You can make open faces for dinner. This is a bread that will last the entire week, not only because of its size, but because of its deliciousness and versatility. This is miche. It's a lifestyle. Come along, let's make this loaf. So this recipe begins with a preferment. You've seen me use these before to make great bread. It's kind of where bread begins in a way. We take a little bit of culture, we add some flour and water, we let it mature overnight. And in that process, the quantity of flavor that you begin with increases exponentially. Overnight, the bacteria and the yeast grow and multiply, and as part of that process, they produce flavor, right? It's an intense way to add great flavor. If you're not baking with preferments yet, trust me, that will be a whole new level that you can unlock in the best way possible. So this one begins with a little bit of sourdough culture in the bowl. And I go ahead and add my water next so that I can break the culture up in it. I'm just using sort of room temp water here because the room's kind of cold. And now I'll get the whole wheat in. Whole wheat is great for a preferment because it has lots and lots of nutritional value, right? The yeasts and bacteria, they like eating all of that bran and the other elements that are in the whole wheat, just like we do. It's good for them. Okay, everything in, stir to combine. This is sort of a dough consistency preferment. And what I mean by that is that it's slightly firm. The reason for that is that because there's so much energy in the whole wheat, I like to control the activity just a little bit. And the way that I can do that is by making it slightly stiffer than I would. So if I made this really a loose consistency, I'd have a lot of dough activity, and that's not really what I want. I want a little bit of activity, not too much. Okay, a nice dough consistency preferment. It holds together. You could knead it on the bench if you wanted to, but you don't need to. It's ready to go. Just get it in the bucket, and we'll cover it 12 to 18 hours in a comfortable spot. And then we'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so this mix begins with just the flour and the water in the bowl. We call it an autolyse, and that's a funny word, but what it means essentially is a period of rest before we actually get to the mixing where we have the salt and the preferment in there, okay? So we're gonna do an autolyse first. The reason for the autolyse is that it helps us build strength and it reduces the amount of folding that we're gonna need later. So into the bowl, flour, water, and that's it. I like water in first because when I'm using a mixer, it will incorporate a little more easily. I've got some whole rye in here, and it's another whole grain flour. And that's one of the things I like about this miche is that it has a fair amount of whole grain in it. But it's not gonna eat heavy. It's not gonna be like a doorstop of a loaf. So whole rye, whole wheat. If you don't have any whole rye, you could use all whole wheat. I think that would be fine. And my old friend bread flour for some strength. We've got a lot of water in here. We also have a lot of whole grain, so I'm just making sure that we've got the backbone that we want. So often when I'm making hearth breads, I don't use the mixer. I'm using it today because it's a slack dough and it allows me to do a little bit more dough development in the beginning, which means that you're gonna have to fold less during bulk. So I'm doing it as a way to sort of save you a little bit of time. So I'm just gonna let this run until homogeneous. That's about it. So stop, scrape as necessary. It's pretty close, but I'm just giving it another minute or so. Okay, good. All I'm looking for here is that it's homogeneous, right? We're not really trying to get any development. We're just hydrating the flour and the water. And when that happens, gluten begins to develop. The dough gains strength and extensibility. It doesn't really have any strength right now, but as it sits over the course of 2 to 4 hours, this is going to change dramatically, okay? Okay, so that's all it is to the Autolyse mix. It's just a combination of the flour and water, and then we're going to let it rest. Now, after the rest, that's when we're going to come back and we're going to mix it a little bit further in the mixer. Before we do that, what I'm going to do is during this period of rest, I'm going to go ahead and put the preferment on top of the dough. This is the preferment that I mixed yesterday. It rests for 12 to 18 hours, and it develops flavor and rises overnight. It smells strong, it smells piquant. It's got a little bit of a cheesy note to it, but it's also gained quite a bit of strength. You can see how I've almost got these long threads of gluten that you can see in there. Anyway, I like to put it on top of the dough right now, even though I'm not going to mix it in. And the reason for that is that I don't want to come back and forget it later, right? Similarly, I'm going to go ahead and add the salt as well as the barley malt that I'm going to use today. So salt right on top. Okay, so cover that, let it rest 2 to 4 hours, then we'll come back and mix it. It's going to be good. It's going to be really good. One of my favorite breads. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that today, but this is one of my favorite breads. One of my favorite things actually that I've written in the past maybe couple of years at least. So we'll be back to mix in a couple hours. All right, so let's mix this dough. So it's had its Autolyse, it's sat for a couple hours, and now it's ready to begin the development phase of mixing. I'm going to start on a low speed for a couple minutes, and then once I sense that it's incorporated well and it looks like it's pretty homogeneous, I'm going to increase the mixer speed up to a medium on a KitchenAid, maybe around 3 or 4, something like that, and I'm going to let it run for 4 minutes. And if you feel like the hook isn't really grabbing it, what I'll do is I'll take a wet hand, I'll go in, I'll push it off the hook, and then restart it. It's sort of the bread mixing equivalent of like scraping the bowl. It's just a little bit of maintenance to make sure that the machine is doing what you want. So it looks pretty homogeneous, it looks soft. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and increase the speed and build some strength. Thank you for your service. Okay. So after about 4 minutes on a medium speed, the dough is clinging the bowl. It's sticky for sure. For sure it's still sticky, and that's okay. That's going to improve the quality of our final loaf that comes out of the oven. Having that extra moisture in there is going to make it even nicer. Maybe when you're at this phase, you're even like slightly concerned, like, how am I going to shape that? Don't worry. Like, just sort of surf that amount of concern right now. It's going to work out. We're going to proof this for 2 hours. We're going to give a fold after an hour. And then, of course, I'm going to show you how to shape. I've got your back. Don't feel too nervous at this junction, okay? Nice, beautiful dough. We'll get it into a container, and then we'll set it in a nice place to rise. I really like these buckets. If you've watched our videos, you'll see me using these Cambro buckets all the time. They're really, really helpful. And this is the perfect amount for this dough. It's actually one of the things that drove the size of the loaf, was that I wanted something that would fit in this container because they support good bread, believe it or not. So straight in. At this point, if you want, you can go ahead and give a fold just to see how the dough feels. It's not so much that we're trying to strengthen it or anything. It's just a chance for me to sort of feel what the consistency of the dough is, and it feels nice. Look how beautiful that is. Get a lid on it. So you don't want that to be sort of hot, like 80 degrees or more, or cold, down around 60 or something like that. Find a comfortable condition and coddle it. If it's super cold in your house, you may need to put it inside a small proofing box, or put it on a heating pad, or get one of the many accessories that are designed for keeping things at a constant temperature. So, happy nappy, we'll come back in an hour and fold you. Okay, so the dough's ready for its first fold. It's actually started to move already. It's got a little bit of activity. I can feel it, it feels alive. And I'm just gonna do a bowl fold, pretty straightforward, stretching from the outside to the middle. Real extensible, beautiful, beautiful dough. It's one of those doughs where there's almost a temptation to overwork it because it feels so good in the hand. So just making my way around, looking to build some tension, and then if you want, sometimes I'll invert it so that the seam's down. You don't have to. That's it, bow fold, done. It already smells good too. Man, beautiful dough. Okay, another hour or so, and then we'll come back and we'll divide it. Okay, let's shape this dough. This is a happy situation here. You remember where it was after we folded it last, right? This one's had a little bit more time, but you can tell that it's super happy, it's active, it's risen really well, it's definitely ready to be shaped. So let's do it. Before I want to shape though, let's talk about what the dough is going to go into after we shape, right? So when I was writing the recipe and I was thinking about making a large miche, one of the barriers to sort of doing that is what are we going to put the dough in for its final rise, right? Not everybody has a large, expensive banneton that'll accommodate a loaf of this size. So I started looking around the kitchen. First I used a sauté pan. The sauté pan worked pretty well, like a 10-inch sort of sauté pan. That worked pretty well. But then I saw a pie plate and I said, man, that pie plate's pretty nice. And then I saw my banneton liners and I said, man, I wonder if that banneton liner would fit on the pie pan. And guess what? It does. And voila, that will work really well as a stand-in for a banneton. Now, before we put the dough in there though, we want to prepare it. And in this case, that means putting a little bit of whole wheat down. You could use whole rye too, but you want to put a very generous but even layer. You could also use a sifter here. In fact, I usually advocate for using a sifter for sort of maximum accuracy and evenness, right? A sifter does a very good job of depositing flour in an even manner. See a spot that I missed? Just make sure you get that. Okay, set that aside. Ready. Now, onto my surface, I want to sprinkle a little bit of flour because I'm going to dump this dough out of the container and I need a place for it to land, okay? And I don't want it to stick to the bench. Again, this is a little bit sticky. And so I might also just flour the top side of this real quickly. And as an additional measure, you know, you can grab your flexible scraper. I always say it's like my right hand. I'll grab that, I'll run it down the sides a little bit just to help it release so that I sort of deform it less as it comes out of the container. We're to that point in the bread making process where I'm trying to be gentle. I don't want to tear the dough if at all possible, okay? Like I said, I'm just going to release it a little bit, and having that small amount of flour on top will help that. I'll just turn it on its side and I'll continue that action, just sort of almost like I'm cutting it out of the container as opposed to shredding it or pulling it and ripping it. I'm trying to avoid that. See how that's come out in one fell swoop, right? I've been gentle with it, and in being gentle, I've maintained some structure. Some of the structure which we developed during bulk fermentation has been retained here, and it looks good. Now, you might feel a little bit concerned. Looking at this, I can tell that the top side is tacky, right? If I put my finger on it, it's going to stick, right? It's going to stick. So, don't touch that side. There's an easy solution. Just don't touch that part. Touch the part where it's meeting the floured surface of the bench, right? If I just touch there, we're going to be fine. So, now, to shape, what I'm going to do is, starting with my hand on the dry portion of the dough, I'm going to lift, stretch slightly, and press in the middle to seal. So I'm going to lift, stretch slightly, press in the middle to seal. I'm going to work my way around the dough, stretching, pressing slightly. Just work your way around the dough, pressing to seal. It should come together, should look really pretty, and that's it. It's done. So it's not so much a shaping as it is a stretch and fold almost, right? It's not like we're going to put the weight of our arms or hands in there and really do some sort of physical action. It's just a gathering. It's really more of a gathering than anything. Okay, so the seam side is underneath right now. I want that to be on the top side when I go into my form, right? So I'll just take it and I'll just roll it into there. If you see a spot where it's sort of coming unadhered, don't worry about that too much. That's all going to come out in the wash. This is not the show side of the loaf. This is the bottom side of the loaf, okay? So cover that, and then you'll let it sit for, an hour, hour and a half around there. While that happens, you're going to preheat the oven, and we'll be baking in no time. Beautiful dough. All right, so it's been about an hour, maybe just a few minutes more than that, and this dough is moving well. I put it in a warm spot. I've sort of coddled it a little bit, and it's moved well in this sort of makeshift proofing vessel. Okay, so how do I know it's ready? Well, it feels a little bit marshmallowy to me. Actually feels very marshmallowy. So what I'm going to do now is actually invert it onto a piece of parchment, and then I'm going to let it hang out for just a minute, because if I let it dry out just slightly, you're going to have a much easier time when you go to score it, okay? So now I'm going to invert it onto a piece of parchment. It's going to hang out for a minute, and then we'll come back and we'll score it and load it. I've got a flat tray here. I'm going to use that. You could also use a baking peel if you wanted to. Okay, so putting this on top, trying not to compress the loaf, and then I'm just going to flip it. Boop, like that. And it's pretty well centered. Sometimes you get lucky. And then if I've floured it well, that should release real well. So far, so good. Okay. It looks good. And I'm going to come back in just a minute and score it. You don't need to cover it at this point. We're encouraging it to dry out just a little bit, and that's going to make it so that the lamb that I'm going to score it with glides much more easily, and I get a much more accurate score of the loaf. Okay, so this is rested for just a minute. If the dough feels like it's really well proofed and very soft and like it's sort of wanting to move sideways on you, you can skip that period. It's only there so that you get a little bit cleaner score of the loaf. It doesn't really impact the flavor or other aspects, so you can skip that if you want to, okay? So I'm going to do this in a classic cross-hatch pattern. I'm going to cut in the center and then on the sides, and then I'll follow up with a second set of cuts that run at an angle. I like that score because it evenly releases the loaf in all directions, so it's good for a round loaf. So center and then the sides, and then I go across. And if I do a good job, I feel like I intersect up here, I intersect right here, I intersect here, and I intersect here. Loaf looks good. Let's get it in the oven. Okay. Woo. I think that's about as big of a loaf as you can make in the home oven on a standard stone. It's over a kilo, it's like 1.2 kilos. It's big. I can smell the sour, it's toasty. I don't know. To me, this is a bread where there's enough of it that you can almost base your week around it. Like, we eat through a loaf of this as the week goes by, right? So Miche is kind of like a lifestyle, I feel like. It's a bread that accommodates your life where every day is based around the deliciousness and health of a beautiful, bountiful loaf. This is what Miche is kind of all about for me. Beautiful, beautiful loaf. I'm happy with the bake. You can tell that we steamed. We've got nice color between the cuts. Bottom is, well baked but not dark. That's 50 minutes, 50 minutes. We need that amount of time because there's a lot of moisture in the loaf. We want to get that out. We want to set that crust nice and firm. We'll cut this open. The point of cutting it is so that I can eat it, right? So that I can taste it and tell you how great it is and encourage you to make it. It's not one of those breads where when you cut it, there's this big reveal and you have this like crazy open structure. That's not Miche. Miche isn't that sort of type of person. Miche is much more of like a workaday. They're there for you every day. There's nothing wild and crazy, right? Crumb should be open, but not like super aerated, No Pont de Cristal situation here. Yeah, it's open. It's like what it should be, So it's a structure that has some openness, but it's not going to be as wildly open as a bread which is higher hydration or a bread which has had cold fermentation. Beautiful, bright, acidic quality that's I sort of want from a nice sourdough loaf. It's got enough flavor to match up to the amount of whole grain in it. So whole wheat, whole rye, a crust which is firm but not too substantial, not too thick. You know, these breads which are not chilled before baking have a more tender crumb. They have a less of a hard outer shell to them, which I like. Beautiful brightness of the whole grain. A lot of flavor, really just a ton of flavor. You know, what's really striking me is that I do get that little bit of barley malt that I put in there, so it's got just a tiny bit of sweetness to sort of balance the acidity and balance the mineral content that comes from the whole grain. It's got a full bake, so you have that roasted quality on the outside just a little bit. I mean, it's everything that I want in a bread. You know, if I could only make one bread from here on out, this would be it. It's the bread that I can sort of plan my day around, you know? So this is Martin and Tucker in the studio saying thanks for joining us. We appreciate you. We appreciate that you're following the channel. If you haven't yet, go ahead and like and subscribe for more content. We've got so much good stuff coming along. This has been our Miche. We hope you enjoy it. Thanks for joining us.